forwarded on to us. There is a 3-page memo that was part of the agenda, and there was a lot of information that was part of the agenda, but the last 3 pages were the memo that Brian sent to council. And while I thought that the points that he was making at the last council meeting were reasonable and responsible and clear, after receiving the memo, I thought that the information contained herein jumped off the page at me, and actually probably would have makes a more solid case than we were probably making, discussing it back and forth amongst ourselves and our city attorney. So I asked the information to be put back on the agenda. Now, there was quite a few pages that were included with this new business item. I'm going to focus on the memo that Ryan Denk provided, and I'm actually not going to start with at the beginning of the memo. I'm going to start with for council members, it's on page 346. The nonconformity of managing board of commissioners authorized by Kansas statute 12-826. I'm not sure what the SEQ means.
It just means there's
it's not a
it's part of a greater act.
Inclusive.
Yeah, and
Sure.
so there's several statutes that follow that.
Yeah, I understood it, but I didn't want to mispronounce whatever it might be. So, but I want to point out that the first item is commission composition. And Kansas statute 12-826 limits the number of commission members in cities of the second class to 3. The establishing EUB ordinance number 2296 establishes a 5-member board. Kansas statute 12-827 establishes terms of 3 years for commissioners. The EUB ordinance at section 2B establishes 4-year terms. We've got an ordinance that was established 5 years ago that is inconsistent with Kansas statute on this matter, and short of a charter ordinance exempting ourselves from 12-826 and 827, we are not in compliance with state statute when it comes to the composition of the electric utility board. Second item, payment of expenses. Kansas statute 12-826 establishes a procedure by which utility bills and expenses are paid requiring either city council or staff approval, or the payment of such expenses and bills under procedures prescribed by the city. The Electric Utility Board ordinance at section 3A does not require city approval of any expenditures by the EUB, and authorizes the EUB at section 4I to establish its own purchasing policy. It was suggested to me in an email from a constituent that it was asked of me, why is it that the council doesn't review EUB expenditures? Well, it's because it's not required by ordinance number 2296. And the Electric Utility Board has established their own purchasing policy. This, again, is not only inconsistent with Kansas statute. The fact that city council members haven't been approving expenditures for the electric utility board is certainly one thing, but it's handled by their ordinance. The other thing that the ordinance doesn't provide for is the electric utility board members approving the expenditures just like we do as part of our consent agenda at every council meeting. I don't know about the rest of you, but I go through those expenditures. I've contacted Laura about expenditures that I've seen on there. I know a number of you have had questions about expenditures. Shoot, maybe all of you.
Yep.
Larry's not here this evening. Larry has been very careful in going over the expenditures. But at this point, we've got 2296 has established a board that doesn't require city approval for expenditures and hasn't been getting approval of expenditures from their board. Number 3 was rates. Kansas Statute 12-828 dictates that the Board of Commissioners recommends rates to the governing body. Kansas Statute 12-829 dictates that upon recommendation of the Commission, that the governing body shall, by ordinance, set rates. The EUB ordinance, at Section 3A, dictates that the EUB establishes customer rates. The EUB ordinance at Section 4G states that the board shall establish rates. The EUB ordinance at Section 4H dictates that the board develops and implements economic development incentives, which presumably involves adjustment of rates. I've been coming to council meetings for a couple of years longer than I've been a member of the governing body, and I don't ever recall approving the council approving expenditures for the EUB. I mean, approving rates for the electric utility board, but Kansas statute says that the governing body must approve those rates and needs to set them by ordinance. This hasn't been done, and in this way, the EUB ordinance 2296 is inconsistent with Kansas statute. Employees. Kansas statute 12-828 dictates that the Board of Commissioners, and they mean the EUB, recommends such employees as may be necessary to properly operate the utility. KSA 12-829 provides that upon recommendation of employees from the Commission, that the governing body shall provide for such employees as may be necessary to operate the utilities, define their duties, and fix their salaries. The governing body also has authority to remove employees upon a demonstration of inefficiency or neglect of duty. The EUB ordinance at Section 3C provides that the director of the EUB appoints and removes employees in consultation with the city human resources manager. 12-828 and 829 are not ordinances, state statutes that we have exempted ourselves from. It makes Section 3C invalid, and the Commission hasn't made any recommendations to the councils to operate the utility, how the employees should operate the utility, define their duties, or fix their salaries. And it's awful hard to manage your employees when you're working with a ordinance that is invalid when it comes to appointing or